We haven't missed a whole lot, so. So anyway, the second box there, this sale is subject to financing. So you would, if you check that box, then there's other boxes that you would need to check. Is it a conventional, FHA, VA? You know, what type of loan is it? The amount of what percentage of the purchase price is a, you know, is it a 95.5? So you put 95% of the purchase price. If that were the case, if it's conventional, and maybe they're doing a, you know, 80%. So you would put 80% there. Or you can put a dollar figure. I would probably recommend putting in the percentage. The nice part about putting a percentage in, then if the offer gets countered, then you don't have to worry about changing the loan amount that you're trying to get. You know, if you have 80% and you change it from 200,000 to 210,000, the percentage is still 80%. So the borrower can still go after that, you know, 80% of it, 168,000, instead of you having to figure that out and change this over here. So it's one less thing that would need to be changed if a counter is made. So then you're going to check, is it fixed rate or an adjustable rate? If it is fixed rate, you can put in a percentage here. Same with an adjustable rate mortgage. I'm not seeing many adjustables these days because the rates are so low already. Why would you need to get an adjustable? And then most of them that I'm seeing are at the prevailing rate of interest at the time of settlement. But if your person, if they're tight on financing and they can only afford, you know, a certain percentage, well, then put that percentage here in the first box. And one thing I'll cover now, just kind of to reiterate it, it covers it in the contract here, but tell your buyer if they're tight on things, and they want to make sure that they can get the financing they want or get out if they can't, then they need to make loan application within 7 days, and they need to go ahead and lock in at the rate when they do that. If the rate is below what they say they want it to be, they better lock in at that time, because if it goes up above it and they fail to lock in within those 7 days when they make application, then they can be found to possibly be in default. They might not be able to get out on the financing contingency because they failed to lock in. So anyway, I'll go into that a little bit more here in a little bit. The loan shall be amortized for a term of, most of them are 30 years, but we are seeing people doing 15 years and 20-year loans and everything these days, again, because the rates are so good. And shall require not more than a total of blank discount and origination points. I am going to cover the financing pretty much all the way through, because it is something that we do see problems with sometimes. So the principal amount to be assumed will be the outstanding. I'm going to skip assumptions because we are not seeing many assumptions. Purchaser shall pay the balance of the purchase price at settlement less any deposit. So if they were getting an 80% loan, then they're going to need to come up with 20% plus closing cost less whatever deposit they put in. That's what that means. Nothing in this agreement prohibits purchaser from seeking financing other than as specified above, so long as settlement is not delayed and there is no cost to seller. Purchaser's failure to obtain such alternative financing does not relieve purchaser from the obligations to obtain the financing specified above. So let's say they were doing that conventional loan. They put in here that they're doing an 80% loan or 80% conventional loan. Then they go out and they find that, well, you know what? Or the lender says you could probably do a 95.5 FHA and the rate might be better, so on and so forth. Let's say that buyer tries to do that. If they can't get that alternative financing, then that doesn't get them out of, because the primary financing that they contracted for was the conventional. So they need to get turned down for the conventional financing in order to be able to get out of the contract on financing. If they don't get that 95.5 or alternative FHA financing, that does not get them out of the contract. If they get the 95.5 financing and they go to settlement that way, great. It doesn't matter that it's different than what the contract said, as long as they go to settlement and it doesn't cost that seller anything to do so, or doesn't cost extra time. Everybody good with that?
Yep.
Cool. So seller agrees to pay at settlement the sum of blank towards purchaser's closing costs, prepaids, discount points, and loan expenses. So a flat dollar amount, whether it's $1,000, $5,000. It can be a percentage. So you could put 1% of sales price there or something like that. But normally we are seeing dollar figures there. So just to let you know before, well, one thing, as hopefully everybody knows, although the newer people might not, definitely have your buyers get pre-qualified with a lender first. So, or a loan officer. And when they do so, then you as the agent, you ought to reach out when you are writing the offer for them, or before you got to show properties and everything, get the specifics of what type of loan that they are going to be going for. Is the lender recommending that they, try and get some seller subsidy? And if so, what is the max that they can get? Because you don't want to put in a big amount here and then the lender say, well, you can't take that much. So ask those questions of the loan officer before you start writing the offer. Number 5, appraisal. This sale is or is not further subject to property's appraised value equaling or exceeding the purchase price, which value shall be determined by an appraiser selected by the purchaser's lender. If cash purchaser, then the purchaser would select the appraiser. The appraisal shall be ordered within 15 days of the date of ratification. It shall be the responsibility of purchaser to advise purchaser's lender of this requirement. I won't read this part. I'll summarize this next part. If they don't do it within the 15 days, then the seller has the right to terminate, to send a notice of termination after that 15 days. However, let's say it goes 20 days and then the appraisal is done on the 20th day. If that appraisal is done prior to the seller sending a termination notice, then the seller can't send the termination notice after the appraisal's been done, just because it was done late. Okay. Regarding the appraisal, if the purchase, here's the big one where we get questions. If the purchase price exceeds the appraised value, so it doesn't appraise, purchaser shall either proceed with consummation of this agreement without regard to the amount of the appraised value. So the buyer can move forward and make up the difference, or make a written request to the seller within 5 days of receipt of the appraisal for a reduction in the purchase price, so long as the reduced purchase price is not lower than the appraised value. So you're only allowed to ask for the purchase price to come down to what it appraises at. So, a $400,000 property, if it appraises for $390, $390 is as low as you're allowed to ask the sales price to be reduced to. Let's see. And also you need to provide seller a copy of the appraisal or lender verification of the appraised value. Seller shall then have 5 days to respond to the purchaser's request for a reduction in the purchase price. If the parties are unable to agree in writing as to a purchase price within 5 days following the response deadline, then either purchaser or seller may terminate this agreement by written notice to the other party and subject to the provisions of paragraph 8. I won't go through all that. What paragraph 8 says is for the most part, the buyer is going to get their deposit back and everybody walks away. Okay, doke. If purchaser does not request a reduction in the purchase price within the 5 days after receipt of the appraisal, then this condition shall be deemed waived by purchaser. So if it doesn't appraise, you as the buyer's agent need to make sure that your buyer understands they have 5 days to put it in writing if they want to try and reduce the price, and to put that in. If they miss that 5 days, then they are stuck making up the difference. Everybody good with that? Number 6, financing. If this agreement is conditioned upon purchaser obtaining financing, purchaser shall make written application for such loan within 7 days after the date of ratification, as defined in paragraph 27. And again, what that says, just to let is a day is a day. A day is a calendar day, not business days. So it's 7 calendar days. And shall make diligent effort to secure a written loan commitment no later than 5 p.m. on the settlement date set forth in paragraph 9. If at the time of such loan application, purchaser chooses not to lock in the rate, this is what I talked about a few minutes ago, and or points that meet or exceed the requirements set forth in paragraph 4, purchaser waives such rate and point contingency. If this agreement is not conditioned upon purchaser obtaining financing, purchaser shall provide seller written verification from a third party in possession of purchaser's assets within 7 days after the date of ratification that purchaser has sufficient assets to pay the balance of the purchase price at settlement. So you can provide a bank statement showing that you've got the funds, or you can get somebody from your bank or whatever finance institution, or not finance, but it's going to be a bank normally, that they would put a letter that they have X amount, that will cover what they need to go to settlement. I will say you don't have to give all bank statements. You just have to show enough money that they can cover the purchase price. So if they have $1 million in the bank and they're buying a $400,000 property, they only need to show that they have 400,000. So that is on a cash deal. If purchaser fails to comply with any of the provisions of this paragraph or fails to obtain a written loan commitment by 5 p.m. on the settlement date, then seller may terminate this paragraph or this agreement by written notice to purchaser, and subject to provisions of paragraph 8, purchaser's deposit shall be refunded, so on and so forth. As used in this paragraph, diligent effort shall mean the purchaser has provided all information or documentation requested by a lender within 7 days of each such request and paid all costs associated with such loan application, including but not limited to application fees, credit reports, and appraisals. Purchaser, so if they are asked for documentation and they take more than 7 days, then they were not diligent. So therefore they could be in default and not get their deposit back. Okie doke. So this is another thing to tell your buyers is, look, buyer, when the lender asks for something, you need to jump on it and get that to them. Don't drag your feet. A lot of buyers think, well, you know what? We'll just drag our feet, or we won't give the lender what they want. They get cold feet, and all of a sudden they're looking for a way out, and they think, well, if we don't give the lender this information, then we'll get turned down for the loan, and therefore we can get out and get our deposit back. Wrong. If they don't make a diligent effort, then they can be found to be in default and therefore not be able to get their EMD, and the seller can possibly go after them for even more than that. So explain that to them before they put themselves in that position. Let's see here. Purchaser authorizes the lender to disclose to the listing broker and selling broker information about the progress of the purchaser's loan application and approval, including whether purchaser has complied with the lender's request and paid all costs associated with such application, and furnish a copy of purchaser's loan estimate and closing disclosure to the selling broker. If after diligent effort purchaser is unable to obtain financing, then this agreement shall terminate, and subject to the provisions paragraph 8, purchaser would get their EMD back, blah, blah, blah. So now in that last part, you are going to need proof that they got turned down. The other side is not going to just take your word for it. So you're going to need it in writing that from the lender that they got turned down. Wire fraud alert. This is just a a warning to the seller, well, to the parties, that there are people out there hacking things, and that they may get an email saying that they've changed the wiring instructions, or, here's the new wiring instructions. Tell them not to do that. So number 8, deposit. Purchaser shall make a deposit of whatever that amount's going to be. I see them, normally in the 1% to 2% range, or lower. Lots of times they are just $1,000, $1,500, even on a $400,000 house, to be held by. Remember, we do not hold deposits. We don't hold EMDs at Keller Williams Richmond West. So we recommend that it be held with a title company. So hopefully that would be Vesta that you would be doing that with. Nice part about it is we did this to let you know, to reduce your liability as an agent. Also to make it easier, it makes it quicker and easier for the MCA for you to get your money. And if things fall apart, it makes it a lot easier. We're not the one holding the deposit and having to try and track as much stuff down to disperse it. So we don't hold them. And again, the nice part with, again, like Vesta, is they have a app, so the buyer doesn't have to deliver the money to them. They can do it from their living room and just take a picture of the check, or whatever they want to do, and send it that way. So it's a lot easier than us having to get the check. So you get to check which form it's going to be in. Purchaser, select one, has paid the deposit to the escrow agent, which is normally not going to be the case if we're normally seeing the second box checked, or will pay the deposit to the escrow agent within, and normally it's 3 to 5 days or something like that. Okie doke. After date of ratification. If purchaser fails to pay the deposit as set forth herein, then purchaser shall be in breach of this agreement. Let me let you know, even if it's going to be held by a title company, so it's going to be held by Vesta, you, as really both agents here, but especially you as the buyer's agent, should be reaching out to Vesta and finding out, has my buyer deposited the EMD with you yet? If they do not deposit it within the time frame agreed upon here, then first thing you should do is call your buyer and say, hey, what's up? Why haven't you paid the deposit? Oh my goodness, I forgot. I'll do it right now. So if that's the case, great, let them do it right then. However, you still need to contact the other side. So you need to send something in writing. So an email would be fine, to the listing agent, and say, I just found out that the buyer did not make the deposit within the 5 days agreed upon in the contract. I needed to let you know. I just spoke with them. Supposedly they are doing that as we speak. They lost track of time, or whatever the case might be. That's why I normally recommend you call the purchaser to find out what in the world's going on. Another thing that you'll find that I see kind of on a regular basis, not a bunch, but that these things bounce. And normally, the funny thing is, I don't know why, I guess people's brains go on vacation a little bit when they're buying a house. Most of the time, it's that they used the wrong account or forgot to transfer money into the account that they did use. Lots of times they have the money, they just did it out of the wrong account. So if that's the case, if it bounces, kind of the same thing as if they don't do it on time, contact them and say, what in the world's going on? Why did your check bounce? And maybe they say, oh my goodness, wrong account. What I would recommend you do is say, well, then go get certified funds, and you need to deliver them where you're supposed to do today. And if that's what they're going to do, then email the listing agent and say, hey, need to let you know the EMD bounced. They are getting certified funds and delivering it right now. However, on the flip side of this, before that EMD is delivered or that bounced check is made good, it gives your seller the right to terminate this contract. It doesn't automatically terminate the contract or make the contract void. It makes it a voidable contract. So if it was supposed to be 5 days, the 6th day, you reach out to the seller and say, you know, hey, need to let you know the buyer has not made their deposit yet. If the seller wants, they could immediately send notice that because of paragraph 8 and the deposit was not, delivered per the agreement, the seller hereby voids this contract. Buyer can't do anything about that. So, that's normally going to happen if, in these hot markets we've got right now, if another offer came in, that's better. Seller might be looking for a way out. So there's a good one right there. So anyway, make sure to tell your buyer, be timely on it. So any questions on that?
What if they get cold feet right then?
What's that?
I said, what if they get cold feet right then and just don't want to do it, the purchaser? Is that an out, or they don't have to pay anything?
Well, and we've had that. So we've got a couple of those going on between our 6 offices that I know of right now. And so first thing you need to do is tell your buyer, if that's the case and they don't want to do this, tell them they need to go seek legal counsel. And I would put that in writing to them. So follow, if you're on the phone with them, follow up with a text or an email. I know you got cold feet. You were asking whether you should make the deposit or not. That is a legal question. I am not an attorney for you. I cannot advise you on that. So you would need to go and seek legal counsel as to whether to do that or not. And so, please don't advise them, well, just don't turn in your EMD, because that is legal advice. That right there is automatically a violation of the real estate board regs, because that's the unauthorized practice of law. And we are not allowed to do that. So anyway, tell them to seek legal counsel. Unfortunately, most buyers are still not going to do that. Do not tell them not to do it. Let them make that decision on their own. Just to let you know, just because that EMD is not turned in, like I said, it's not automatically a dead contract. So that seller can keep on moving forward. In fact, we have one that is doing that. I'll be honest, I don't totally know why, but they are continuing to move forward towards settlement, even though the buyer has said they're not turning in the EMD, said they're not going to settlement. The seller on the other side has not terminated the contract yet. This is a Northern Virginia deal. We also had one in Richmond that the same thing was going on. Someone have a question? No? Okay. I thought someone started to speak. Just to save you all a little bit of time, I'm going to, just to let you know real quick, if the deal does get terminated, there are 2 different parts. You terminate, you kill the contract first, then you have to start talking about EMD, who's going to get the EMD. And that is normally part of the release. Just so that everybody knows, and this is not in the contract here, if a contract is terminated, just because they're still fighting over the EMD does not mean that the seller cannot put the property back active and accept another contract. So if the buyer has put in writing that they are not going to settlement, or that they can't get their loan, so they're not going to settlement, or whatever the case might be, and there's a fight over the EMD, the seller can and should go ahead and put it back active on the market and try and get a new contract. Okie doke. They don't have to wait. A lot of agents think that until that EMD, until there's an agreement on who gets the EMD, that seller's not allowed to sell. So and unfortunately they tell their buyers that, well, we can just keep this seller from selling the property. Just don't sign a release. That's not the case. And while I'm thinking about it, in paragraph, and I can't remember, I think it's either like 24 or 27, the default paragraph in this contract says that if one of the parties won't sign a release and the judge determines that they should have, then they will also be responsible for the prevailing party's legal cost and attorney's fees and everything like that. Okay? Not only that, but they may also be responsible for our commissions. Okie doke. So just wanted to point that out, and we'll probably cover it again later on, but that's a big point. One thing about it, just to let you know, if the property is foreclosed upon, then you do not, then the deposit can automatically be sent back. You don't have to get the parties to agree in writing as to who's getting the EMD, but that's only for foreclosures. If you don't have a foreclosure, then the parties are going to have to agree in writing who gets the money back, or a court's going to have to do it. Okay. And since we're not holding it, we're not going to make a determination on who gets it. There is a third option for it. But since we're not holding it, I'm not going to cover that right now. So settlement and possession, settlement shall be made at the offices of. So you put in there, just to let you know, and it's covered in another paragraph, which I'm not going to cover. Y'all can agree to pick, you know, what is it, Shaheen? I can't think of Michael, what's Shaheen's, the whole company, or their title company or settlement company name? Is it just Shaheen or something like that? Or do you know which one I'm talking about?
I don't know Shaheen's full. It's Shaheen and something.
Okay, so if in here it says Shaheen or whatever, and that's what's agreed upon, I just want to let you know, the buyer still has the option to pick their own attorney or settlement company, even if they agree upon something else. So I want to bring this up for, you probably wouldn't be using this contract, but in Virginia, if it's a new home, the sellers may say, you know, you've got to use our settlement company. And so they put in who that settlement company is. Virginia law still allows that buyer to change, even if agreed upon in writing in the contract, that buyer can still choose their own settlement company. And they would just send notice to the seller and say, just to let you know, I've changed and I will be settling with Vesta or whoever it is that they're going to use. Now, if the seller, again, in new homes, lots of times they will say, if you use my settlement, this settlement company, you can get these options or these things, you know, we'll give you an extra $2,000 towards closing cost, or we'll give you a free deck or whatever it might be. They're allowed to do that. And so if you don't use their settlement company, they can take that away, but they can't force you to use their settlement company. Okie doke. Any questions on that part?
I had something to add regarding the termination.
Okay.
So because once a purchase agreement is terminated, it is now no longer under contract. So a listing agent actually has the obligation under the MLS to put it back on the market because it's no longer under contract. So they could, if they did not put it back on the market, they could actually face fines from the MLS for an incorrect status within whatever time frame the MLS did. Just a heads up.
Yep. Okay, so settlement, you're going to you pick one of these boxes. So if you check box number 1, you're going to put in a date or a reasonable time thereafter if the purchaser or seller is making diligent effort to satisfy any contingencies contained in this agreement. Or the second box here, put in a date and subject to the seller's right to cure any title defects as set forth in paragraph 24B. If settlement does not occur within 10 days following such date, a party who is ready, willing, and able to close under the terms of this agreement may terminate this agreement by written notice to the other party and subject to the provisions of paragraph 8. Purchaser's deposit shall be refunded in full, so on and so forth. So if you want to be a little bit more time specific as to when your, especially your buyer is going to be closing, you would probably want to pick option B here, the second one, or not B, but the second one, so that the max that it could really go over is 10 days. And after that 10 days, you know, if there's a title issue or something like that, if it's and it's going to take longer than 10 days to fix it, then that buyer, if the buyer is ready, willing, and able to close, they could say, you know what, you're over your 10 days. We hereby terminate and we're moving on to another deal. Okie doke. Possession of property shall be given at settlement unless otherwise agreed in writing by the parties.
Someone has a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, Rick. Could we go back just on the termination and the release? So if
Okay.
the contract is terminated, are we to submit both the termination and the release for the EMD, or just the release if that's going to be returned?
No, you need to have a document that shows that the contract is terminated. So you would send the termination to kill the contract. Well, lots of times you kill the contract with a notice, and then you can, or the notice can also be that the termination form that they have, that the contract is hereby terminated. Then you need to send also, or in addition to that, you need to send the release, and hopefully the parties will agree who's going to get that EMD within the release. The main thing the release does is it decides who's getting the EMD, and it states in there that the parties basically, are waived of any rights and anything, and the deal is totally dead. So they are.
Okay. So both of those documents have to be done.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. That answers.
Yeah. Now, if what I was saying is, if it's terminated and they don't, let's say the seller won't sign the release. In fact, I've had them here where they've used the HOA law or condo law to be able to get out of a contract, which in Virginia, the buyer can absolutely get out if they have not received, or within 3 days of receiving the HOA docs, they can legally get out of the contract. They can say, we hereby void, and the law says that they will get their EMD back. We've had sellers say, I don't care what the law says, I'm not giving them the EMD back. That contract is dead and should be put back active in the MLS and move on to something else. And that would be a case of where the seller, when that went to court, the seller's probably not only going to be paying the EMD or giving up the EMD, they're going to be paying for that buyer's attorney's fees and court cost and everything. So sometimes you're going to only have a termination until the release is agreed upon. But to let you know, as far as compliance goes, we're also going to be asking for both.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So possession of the property shall be given at settlement unless otherwise agreed in writing by the parties. So if there's, it's agreed upon that post settlement, the seller, is going to stay for a month afterwards, then it wouldn't be given until a month afterwards. But failure to check one box above shall not invalidate this agreement. The settlement date shall be as inserted above. Seller and purchaser authorize and direct settlement agent to provide a copy of the purchaser's closing disclosure, settlement statement, and/or disbursement summary for this transaction to the seller, purchaser, listing broker, and selling broker. Occupancy disclosure. They're going to check whether they're going to occupy the property or not as their principal residence. Residential property disclosure. Seller represents the property is or is not subject to the Virginia Residential Property Disclosure Act. 98% of the properties that you're going to be selling will be subject to this. The only ones that are not are going to be estates. So if the sellers, the owners of it have passed away and their heirs are trying to sell the property, that would not be required. If it's a bank deal where the bank is selling it, it's not required. The only other one is if it's between family members or something like that, which we normally don't get involved in. Those are the only ones that it's really not required. So the vast majority of the time it is going to be required here. And so normally it is, and you put in here whether it is or is not attached. You as a listing agent, I would make sure that that is available as a document, you know, in the MLS and everything like that. Because if you don't get that signed by the buyer with the offer, or when it's being ratified, that buyer has up to 3 days afterwards, or any time prior to getting it, they can back out of the contract if they haven't received the residential property disclosure. You don't want that to happen. So the other thing I would say is, as the buyer's agent, I would recommend not just having the buyer sign a blank residential property disclosure and sending it in like we see happen, because then your buyer's actually giving up a right. If the seller has not provided it, then don't take away the buyer's right to get out of the contract by having them sign one. So listing agents, make sure your seller signs it and it's available and you're sending it as part of the ratification process. Buyer agents, yeah, if it's sent to you, you need to get your buyer to sign it. If it's not sent to you or not available to you, don't have them sign a blank one. Any questions on that? Property Owners Association disclosure. I'm not going to read this whole thing. What I am going to say is, if it isn't in an HOA or a POA, a Property Owners Association, then yes, you're going to check the box, and the seller is responsible for sending the documents, or getting the documents sent to the buyer. And the buyer has up until the time of receiving the HOA docs, or 3 days after receiving them, they can get out of the contract scot-free for whatever reason. Okie doke. Even if the HOA docs that they receive are not complete, or if they receive notice that, hey, buyer, you are not going to be receiving any HOA docs. There are some older associations and things like that that they don't do them anymore. If the buyer receives that notice, their 3 days starts ticking upon that notice. Any questions on that?
That's 3 days from the contract, correct? From when the
Well, no, they have 3 days from receiving notice that they 3 days after either receiving the documents or receiving notice that they are not going to get the documents. They have 3 days from that point. So if that notice was delivered today, tomorrow would be day 1, Friday would be day 2. They would have up until the end of the day on Saturday to get out of the agreement. And that is basically the same for condo disclosure. Okie doke. These things are just so long, and most of it just tells you how you can deliver them and everything like that, which make sure that you deliver these per the contract. You know, if you're supposed to send things to an email address, send them that email address to make sure delivery is done properly. Owners Association repairs. I am going to cover this a little bit. If a disclosure packet, resale certificate, or inspection report from a property or condominium owners association indicates the property is not in compliance with the association's governing documents, then purchaser may request in writing within 5 days from receipt of any such disclosure packet, resale certificate, or inspection report that seller, at seller's expense, make any repairs, perform any maintenance, or take any corrective action required to conform the property to the association's requirements prior to settlement. If any such repairs, maintenance, or corrective action is not performed prior to settlement, then purchaser may terminate this agreement by written notice to seller, and subject to the provisions of paragraph 8, purchaser's deposit shall be refunded in full to purchaser, and neither party shall have any further obligation hereunder. If purchaser does not make a written request to seller within the 5 days after receipt of disclosure packet, resale certificate, or inspection report containing such non-compliance notice, then purchaser's right to make such request to seller or to terminate this agreement shall be deemed waived. Okay, so when those things come in, your buyer, you need to make sure your buyer reads through them to find out, are there any problems that need to be addressed? Because if they're not addressed within that 5-day period, or the seller's not given notice that they need to address them, then your buyer's going to be buying it just like it is, and they can't get out. Property inspection. Here's a big one here. So purchaser waives a property inspection of the property, or seller hereby grants the purchaser the right to have property inspected by a licensed home inspector or other person selected by purchaser at purchaser's expense, and to request repair of defects revealed and or seller paid closing cost credit to purchaser. Purchaser's requested repairs and seller paid closing cost credit shall be collectively referred herein as repair request. What percent in the hot market we've got right now, are y'all seeing many people waiving the home inspections there?
Yep.
Would you say majority are waiving the home inspections or not?
They're waiving them.
Okay. Are you all warning your buyers what position they may be putting themselves in writing by doing so? If not, I would highly recommend, if nothing else, putting in an email, discuss it over either in person or on the phone, but follow up with an email that they do understand, that they are taking a risk by not doing a home inspection. Or again, by waiving appraisal or whatever, some of the crazy things people are doing. Because we are having, unfortunately, we are having buyers that are making these decisions, going to settlement and then saying, oh my goodness, what did I do? And instead of taking the blame for their own actions, they're turning around and trying to blame the agents and things like that. So.
And the simple way to do that is there is a form in our MLS that says, warning, we recommend you getting a inspection.
Wait,
We can't hear
What?
you.
That last part you broke up there, Michael.
There is a form in our MLS that talks about the recommendation to get a home inspection.
Yeah. So that just covers the home inspection one.
Yep.
Yep. But still, it's a good thing to use. So I'm trying to cover, one of the things I like to teach is cover your assets. Okay. So watch yourself all the time, because unfortunately the world we live in today, people don't like being responsible for their actions. So they're always going to try and find someone else to blame. And knock on wood, so far we've been lucky that we've been able to make all these people realize that it was their decision. But we're not out of this hot market yet. So this can still happen to us. So anyway, let me keep on moving on here. So inspections may include, but are not limited to, all structural and building components and systems, radon gas, underground storage tank, soil condition, environmental testing and engineering studies. The term defects as used in this paragraph 16 shall mean: 1, a condition which impairs the normal stability, safety, or use of any improvements, buildings on the property, or 2, damage to any part of the improvements, but shall exclude any cosmetic flaws, antiquated systems, or grandfathered components that are in working order but would not comply with current building code if constructed or installed today. If a system or component is near or at or beyond its projected life expectancy but is properly functioning, then such system or component will not be deemed a defect as defined herein. Okie doke. So if it's got a 35-year-old air conditioner that still is working and cooling the house, even though it's way beyond its useful life, if it's working, it's not a defect and they can't ask for it to be replaced or repaired. If the house is just not up to code, you know, no GFI plugs in the kitchen. If it were built in 1900 and no remodeling or anything's been done, so it was to code in 1900, then that is not a defect and cannot be asked to be fixed. Okay. So a lot of home inspectors love throwing around, this is not to code. This is not to code. It doesn't matter, home inspector. Was it to code when the job was done, was when it was installed? If so, then shut up about it's not to code, because it doesn't matter. So anyway, sorry, I see that one a lot. And one of my best friends is a home inspector, and he doesn't do it and gets very upset. And so anyway.
So I have a question.
What's
A
that?
question. I
Yes.
have a question. So a leaky, working water heater, is that a defect?
No, if it's leaking, then that is defective.
Okay.
Yeah, it can still be heating, but if it's leaking, at least the leak needs to be fixed. Doesn't mean that
Okay.
the hot water heater might not need to be replaced if it's just the pipe going away from the hot water heater that's leaking. They can fix the leak and the hot water heater could still be there. Now, if it's something within the hot water heater, then that could be different. But yes, that would be defective. Something leaking is something that can definitely be asked to be repaired or replaced.
Thank you.
Yep.
So are the codes based off the year of the home?
It can be I hate to say, it could be the day that something is done. Codes change all the time. So, and it's not, they don't do like, you know, okay, here's the new codes for January 1. If they decide to change a code, it could be on January 13th. You know, they can change them anytime. So anyway, but again, so when it was
in the early 1900s, would they have to comply with that as well?
What's that?
Code? Okay, so say like a house from 1920, would they have to be in compliance with 2021 code?
No, that's what I'm saying is when the house was built, if it was to code when it was built, then the fact that it's 2000, if it wasn't remodeled, if it's remodeled, rooms that were remodeled or something like that, you should get a, oh shoot, I'm drawing a blank on it. I'm having a senior moment here.
Certificate of occupancy.
Yeah, and you need to get a permit to you know, do remodeling and everything like that. And then you're going to have inspections by the government authorities to make sure that it's up, that remodeling part or the addition that you're putting on or whatever, they're going to make sure that things are up to code to that time frame right there. So if there's an addition put on a house, that addition could have things that are up to code. Let's say the addition was done in 2010. The rest of the house might still have things that were from 1900, and they're not required to be updated. So anyway, but if it's an old house that hasn't been remodeled or anything like that, then it does not have to be up to today's code. Okay. Purchaser shall provide seller with an inspection report, or with all inspection reports, cost of repairs and purchaser's written repair request no later than, pick either so many days after date of ratification, or pick a specific date, time and date. Most people are picking so many days afterwards. I would say probably 7 to 10, but it, you know, depends on the availability of home inspectors. You know, that's if you are getting a home inspection. If no box is checked, the inspection deadline shall be 10 days after the date of ratification. In the repair request, purchaser reserves the right to request certain repairs be performed by a contractor currently licensed by the Virginia Board of Contractors, but shall not request seller to perform any inspections of the property. If purchaser does not submit to seller all inspection reports, cost of repairs, and the repair request by the inspection deadline, then purchaser waives the right to request repairs and/or a seller paid closing cost credit, agrees that the present condition of the property is satisfactory, and will proceed to settlement in accordance with the purchase agreement. Seller shall respond in writing to purchaser's repair request within 7 days of its receipt. That's called the negotiation period. If seller agrees in writing to accept such repair request, then the parties shall proceed to settlement. If seller does not respond in writing within the negotiation period, then seller shall be deemed to have rejected purchaser's repair request. If purchaser's repair request is not accepted by seller, then the parties may continue to negotiate the terms of the repair request during the negotiation period. Once a party rejects an offer or presents a counter offer to the other party, then all prior offers and counter offers made by either party regarding the repair request shall be deemed rejected, so that only one repair request offer or counter offer at a time shall be considered. Seller may not require purchaser to accept a seller paid closing cost credit to purchase in lieu of repairs requested by purchaser. Further, no party may unilaterally terminate this agreement during the negotiation period, except pursuant to the optional paragraph below. We'll get to that. So if by 5 p.m. on the 7th day of the negotiation period, no final agreement is reached as to the repair request, then purchaser shall have until 5 p.m. on the 2nd day after the end of that negotiation period to either 1, terminate this agreement by written notice to seller, or 2, accept in writing seller's last offer regarding the repair request and proceed to settlement. If purchaser terminates this agreement or fails to notify seller of its election within the said 2-day period, then this agreement shall terminate, and per paragraph 8, blah, 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 about the EMD going back to the buyer. So the buyer can put it in writing that they're terminating if they don't come to an agreement within that negotiation period, or if they don't put anything in writing, that it's automatically going to terminate. If they want to move forward, they have to put that in writing. Okay? The buyer would need to put it in writing within that 2-day period and deliver it to the seller that they wish to continue to settlement without the things being fixed. All repairs pursuant to paragraph 16 shall be made in a workmanlike manner prior to settlement or such other time as agreed to by the parties. Unless otherwise agreed to by the parties, seller shall provide purchaser with paid receipts for all repairs prior to settlement, or if repairs are to be paid from seller's proceeds, seller shall provide written invoices to purchaser and the settlement agent directing disbursement of seller's proceeds for payment of said invoices. Here's the optional paragraph I talked about up there earlier. This paragraph, you would select one is or is not applicable. If no box is checked, then this paragraph is not applicable. If this paragraph is applicable, the purchaser is dissatisfied with their inspection results of the property, then in lieu of submitting a repair request to seller, purchaser may instead terminate this agreement by written notice to seller prior to the inspection deadline, provided, however, if purchaser submits a repair request to seller, then purchaser waives their right to terminate this agreement pursuant to this paragraph and agrees to proceed with the negotiation of the repair request as set forth above. If purchaser terminates, then that goes on about their EMD. So if they check this box, then that does give them the option of, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, this thing has a lot wrong with it. I'm just going to terminate the contract. Or 2, I've gotten cold feet. They have to do the home inspection, but I've gotten cold feet or whatever the case might be, and I want out. I'm going to try and use this. So they could do the home inspection, send a copy of that and a notice terminating the contract, and they're out. If they say, well, it's really not that bad, so we don't want to, right now, we don't want to get out of the contract. They send a repair because they think, well, the seller will probably fix things. They send a repair request and the seller says, no, I'm not going to fix any of it. Then they can't automatically terminate this thing. Okie doke.
If they ask to fix it and they don't, they can't get out? Is that what you're saying?
Well, because it says here, however, if purchaser submits a repair request to seller, then purchaser waives their right to terminate this agreement pursuant to this paragraph. So,
Let me step in here.
yeah,
So with this optional paragraph,
it's,
essentially the goal with the optional paragraph is that the inspection is basically an as is, you either take it or leave it.
right.
If you decide to, it also gives you the option, an alternative to submit a repair request. And then under the repair, if this box is checked as applicable and the buyer submits a repair request, then you go back to the rest of paragraph 16 and follow that procedure.
Yeah, you would have the 7-day negotiation period, and if you can't come to an agreement within that, then they have to, the contract would, I guess, automatically terminate after 2 days, and so on and so forth. So, yep. Thank you. So Michael probably cleared it up pretty good right there. Any questions on that part?
I will say that if you are thinking about using this alternative paragraph, I would strongly recommend asking the agent on the other side whether or not they will let you use it, because a lot of agents are not very clear with it. I mean, it's 2 years old now, but still people don't understand how it works or what it really means. So there's a lot of agents out there that are scared. If they just don't understand it, they often will not accept your offer because you checked that paragraph. So just a heads up.
Thank you. Seller shall have all utilities supplied.
But
Whoop, yeah. Hey,
Michael,
Wanda.
isn't it also true though that if you check this paragraph, you know, it's an easy out. So the agent receiving that contract will say, okay, you just want an easy out. I got another offer that didn't check this. So
Yeah, and that could be another reason that they don't use it. Yes.
so they might understand it very well, but they just don't want to deal with you being able to walk just
Right.
based on whatever
Yeah.
inspection.
The flip side of that is it's nice to, if you're a seller and you've got a buyer that, you feel is going to be nitpicky, this just gives them the right to go ahead and get out and you can move on to the next. So there's pluses and minuses possibly. So seller shall have all utilities supplied to all systems prior to the inspection. If seller fails to have all utilities supplied, then basically things can be extended for 10 days. I'm not going to go into this whole thing because my voice is starting to, I can tell it might not last all the way. Number 17, default. If either seller or purchaser defaults under this agreement, the defaulting party, in addition to all other remedies available at law or equity, shall be liable for the brokerage fees set forth in paragraph 19 and any brokerage fees set forth in the listing agreement and the listing broker for the property, which document is hereby incorporated herein by this reference, as if this agreement and seller's listing agreement had been performed, and for any damages and all expenses incurred by the non-defaulting party, the listing broker and the selling broker in connection with this transaction in the enforcement of this agreement and seller's listing agreement, including without limitation attorney's fees and court cost. Payment of a real estate broker's fee as the result of a transaction related to the property which occurs subsequent to a default under this agreement shall not relieve the defaulting party of liability for any brokerage fees under this agreement or seller's listing agreement, or any damages and expenses, including attorney's fees and court costs incurred by the non-defaulting party, the listing broker and the selling broker in connection with this transaction. So this is a steep penalty for someone defaulting. I'll be honest, I don't know of any within our office where this has been upheld. However, I will say, or when I say not upheld, in the past 2 months, we've had, I think, 2 at Richmond and at least 1 at one of our other market centers where a buyer has backed out of a contract Yes, they gave the EMD to the seller, and they paid the buyer agent their compensation. And we didn't have to fight them. It was automatic. They just said, here's your money. Normally you've got to fight them like crazy. And we've had 3 cases in the last couple of months where the buyer's just like, you know what, we changed our minds. Here's your money. But down in Richmond, they could be responsible for not only the buyer agent's money, but the listing agent's money also. Okie doke. So that's pretty steep one. That's one. And actually a recommendation that I would do, one thing when I used to sell, I gave a copy of all the contract documents and everything to the buyers and to the sellers right up front. And these are the documents we're going to use for the contract. You all need to read through these before you actually get a contract so that you understand, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, what you're going to be responsible for and everything. Same with you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. And maybe you highlight some paragraphs to say, this is especially important for you to look at because there are some pretty big consequences if you do or don't do what's in this paragraph. So if you don't do that, then, those poor buyers and sellers, this thing's long. By the time you get the different addenda and everything, they could be looking at 15 to 20 pages of fine print, and there's a lot of places where they can get in trouble. Choice of settlement agent, I already covered this one. That's the one in Virginia. The buyer gets to pick who they want to settle the property. That settlement agent, they represent the contract. They don't represent a party, okay? Their job is really to take that contract and do what the contract says and pay the people that need to be paid and everything like that. So that settlement attorney, they're the ones who's going to get all the funds and pay off the loan and all those different things per the closing document. Brokerage fee, this just says that the seller authorizes per the listing agreement and what's agreed on in the MLS or any other written agreement as to how the commissions are going to be broken up, but authorizes them to get paid. Number 20, home warranty insurance. Purchaser has been advised of the availability of home warranty programs. Then they can decline coverage or they do elect to get coverage. Then you can put a cost in there. So this brings something up here. So remember, or everybody in KW, and actually in most all real estate companies, pays errors and omissions insurance. You'll hear it called as E&O, okay, errors and omissions. We have errors and omissions, and it covers most things where agents make mistakes or whatever. I want to let you know there is a deductible. Our deductible is $2,500. That deductible is if we have to use E&O, that deductible is a responsibility of the agent. Okay, so the agent could be paying $2,500 in a deductible. However, there is a way to reduce or waive that $2,500. There are 4 things required by the E&O company that we are using to try and to waive that errors and omission, or that deductible, I mean. 1, you have to be using current standard forms. So you would be using the CVR MLS forms or Virginia Realtor forms. You're not going to be using something that you found online. You went to Google and did a form or whatever. That's not going to do it. So you're using the standard forms. The second one is, if a residential property disclosure is required in, so it's not an estate or something like that, then that was provided by the seller and the buyer signed it. Got the residential property disclosure was used. The third one is a home inspection was either waived or it was completed. If it was waived, you need to have that in writing that it was waived. So up there in that paragraph, you would check the box that it was waived. And the fourth thing is that a home warranty was either gotten or waived. So don't just leave these boxes. If your buyer does not want a home warranty or one's not provided, don't just not fill this in. Check the little box here, declines coverage, because now you've checked that the buyer has waived the coverage, and you can hopefully not have to pay that $2,500 deductible. Okie doke. I know that's not part of the contract, but again, cover your assets, and assets are dollars. So if you can not have to pay $2,500, good for you. And just to let you know, we have had multiple times where agents have had these 4 documents and the deductible is waived. So it's not like we're hoping that it will happen. It has happened for us. So anyway, just wanted to bring that up to you. Related business and services. This one just says that, hey, the listing and selling company, they may have joint ventures or whatever the case might be. And that they're, and just like we do have the one with Vesta, and we've also got the one with McLean Mortgage, and we require you to get those signed by the buyers. So that's kind of what they're talking about here. Purchaser disclosure, purchaser warrants. This is a big one, actually. A lot of people just look over this. Purchaser warrants, he or she does not own any real or personal property that must be sold and settled prior to settlement of this agreement, except as disclosed in this agreement. So in times like this, where it's a hot seller's market and there are buyers trying to get properties, a lot of times the buyers and or their agents will say, well, we just won't tell them that you have to sell this other house in order to buy theirs, because you won't get the contract if they know that you've got to sell a house. So you try to take out the right of first refusal or whatever it is. I'm not the right of first refusal. The yeah. Juanita, what was that? Whoop. You were saying something.
Yeah, the contingency.
Yeah. It's, you're not putting in the contingency that it's contingent on sale of a home. If you're going to try and lie about it, then you also need to scratch paragraph 22 out. Okay. And that's going to be a big flag saying, oh, so these people are trying to get it over on us that they've got to sell something. So don't try and do that. Additional terms, that's a blank spot for you to put in whatever you want to put in. Not saying you have to put anything in there. Expense prorations. I'm not going to go over this one. It's pretty blank. I never heard anybody really complain about this part or see this changed any. Title I am going to go over. At settlement, seller shall convey the property to purchaser by a general warranty deed containing English covenants of title, free of all encumbrances, tenancies, and liens for taxes or otherwise, but subject to such restrictive covenants and utility easements of record which do not materially and adversely affect the use of the property for residential purposes or render the title unmarketable. If the property does not abut a public road, title to the property must include a recorded easement providing adequate access thereto. In the event this sale is subject to a financing contingency on paragraph 4, the access to a public road must be acceptable to the lender. If the examination reveals a title defect that can be remedied by legal action or otherwise within a reasonable time, seller at his/her expense shall promptly take such action as is necessary to cure such defect. If the defect is not cured within 30 days after seller receives notice of the defect, then either party may terminate this agreement at the expiration of such 30-day period by written notice to the other party. Upon termination of this agreement, I won't worry about that part. Well, one thing, see this 30 days here? If you had checked the box up above that settlement will be on a certain date and a max of 10 days, then they don't, if that buyer doesn't want to wait the full 30 for it to get fixed, then they could terminate it after the 10. If they didn't check that box, they checked the first box that says that people are going to try and get things done in a timely manner, then the seller would have the full 30 days to try and fix it before the buyer had the option to terminate. Does that make sense? The parties agree that the settlement date prescribed in paragraph 9 shall be extended if necessary to enable seller to cure any title defect, but not more than 30 days, time being of the essence. So we actually have a deal down in your office or in Richmond West where the seller unfortunately is not able to provide, currently is not able to provide good title, and the other side is saying that the seller is in default. And that's really not the case. So I don't know where that one's going to end up, but the other side just keeps on saying, well, the seller's in default because they're not giving good title. Well, there's a paragraph in here that says the remedies and everything. So if you don't like it, then after 30 days, then terminate. It's, you know, you're allowed to terminate, but it's not meaning that the seller is in default. Land use assessment. If a property is in land use, then, and to let everybody know what land use is, because a lot of people don't know what land use is, it's probably going to have to be a property of 5 acres or more for there to be any shot at any type of land use. And normally it's even more than that. But there is a reduction in real estate taxes if a property qualifies and is in land use. And it can be quite a big tax break. Just to let you know, I live on a farm, and we have our farm, when we bought it, was already broken up into 10 to 20 some acre lots. They all qualify for land use. And so we've got 10-acre lots that the real estate taxes should be in the neighborhood of $3,000 a year for that one 10-acre lot. The land use tax we're paying is about $25 to $28 a year. So it's almost a $3,000 a year reduction in real estate taxes. What they're talking about here in rollback taxes is, one, if I don't keep that qualified for land use, they can go back 6 years and get the difference in taxes that were owed plus a 10% penalty and interest. So I could all of a sudden be looking at $20,000 to $25,000 in rollback taxes if it went, you know, if it fell out of land use. So it can be a big dollar amount. So that's why it's covered in the contract, even though not many properties fall into it. So it does say that if the property is in land use and this sale results in disqualification from land use eligibility, then the seller will pay the rollback taxes assessed. If the property continues to be eligible for land use assessment, purchaser agrees to make application at purchaser's expense for the continuation under land use and pay any rollback taxes resulting from failure to do so. So if a property is in land use, you need to make sure that, and normally the sale of the property does not automatically disqualify the property from land use. So the purchaser is going to need to reapply to make sure that it stays in land use. Have any of y'all ever had properties that were in land use?
So Rick, is that saying if you say there's some rural property and it's now zoned as agricultural?
Right, right.
And then that seller sells that property and they decide to build a house on it and or no longer use it for agricultural use. Is this the saying that the seller could have to go back and?
It shouldn't. In that case, the seller is not the one changing the use.
Okay.
The buyer is. And just to let you know, so one, to be in land use, it's either going to have to be in a conservation easement or something like that, or it's going to have some kind of agricultural use or vineyard or some type of agricultural use. There are some some ways around that, but in most cases, it's going to have to be an agricultural use in order for it to be qualified and be in land use. But you can look in the tax records very easily. It says whether it's in land use or not in the tax records. So, but if it's a raw, let's say one of my 10-acre lots, and I sell a 10-acre lot to someone, and they're going to build a house on it. They're the ones who's changing the or disqualifying that. And so that buyer would be responsible for the rollback taxes. Just to let you know, and they might not be responsible for all the rollback taxes. I know this is not a rollback tax class, but if they just have a 1-acre yard and drain field and everything that they take out of land use, and they keep the rest of it, the other 9 acres in agricultural use and qualifying under land use, they would only pay the rollbacks on that 1-acre portion. So it doesn't, just because they build a house doesn't mean it disqualifies the whole property. It may, but it doesn't automatically. So
Okay.
Does the rollback go into your ownership?
what do you mean?
Like, if
When
If
you,
I bought it-
if you buy a property that is in land use for agricultural use,
right,
if you're going to continue agricultural use, then you would go to the county and sign the paperwork that you would need to sign to keep it in land use. If you do not, and you let it go out of land use, then you, the buyer, would be the one that would be responsible for it.
for that year or for all the prior years that you owned it?
For the rollback tax is all the prior years.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes,
So
Yep.
nobody wants to buy your 10 acres. Okay.
correct. So, it's funny. I look at a property being in land use as a good thing because it's a big reduction in taxes. Some people look at it like, oh my God, because I don't want to do it. And also we do agricultural stuff. So I don't have a problem with keeping it in farm use or whatever. But a lot of people aren't going to want to do that. And so being in land use might be a negative for them. So that's just something you need to look at. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Haven't really gone into that one before.
Is there a quota that land has to produce, or can you just use it at will?
No, there is an amount that has to be, it's not net profit, it's gross, to be able to be in it. But that's a different thing. It's normally $1,500, but there are some times where it's different than that. So per $1,500 per year, but you should also have a Schedule C in your taxes and everything like that. So anyway, the easiest thing, if you're not going to do it, you can rent it out to a farmer and let them farm it and qualify also. Risk of loss, D, so that we get off C there. Basically, risk of loss, it's the seller's risk up until settlement and the buyer's risk after. Okie doke. The other thing that it does cover here is, let's say there's substantial damage that happens to the house prior to settlement. The buyer doesn't have to get out of the contract, but they may terminate the contract. Okay. If it's substantial harm done to the property and going to take a long time to get it fixed and everything. Equipment condition and inspection. This one, seller shall convey the property or convey and purchaser agrees to accept the property at settlement in its physical condition at the time, the date of ratification. Okay, except as otherwise provided herein, which means, so if you agree after the home inspection that you're going to fix something, and that's going to be fixed, but everything else that's not agreed to, be fixed at that home inspection needs to be in the same condition as it was at date of ratification. The other thing that this paragraph here says is that all appliances and everything are going to be in working order unless it's in writing that they're not. So if you've got an oven that's not working and it's going to be sold like that, then you need to put the oven is being sold in as is condition, and right up front. Okie doke. It also says in this paragraph that the purchaser has the right to do a pre-settlement walkthrough inspection and that the property will be in broom clean condition. Now, sometimes the seller's definition of broom clean condition and the buyer's are totally different. I mean, I've had buyers that are upset because all the carpets, you know, they feel broom clean means that all the carpets needed to be cleaned by a professional cleaner, all the windows needed to be cleaned by a professional cleaner, and so on and so forth. That's not what this paragraph says. Letter F, well and septic or a municipal system. You're going to check whether it's on a well or a municipal water system. You're also going to check whether it's on a septic system or a municipal sewage system. If you check that it's on municipal systems and it is determined that it is not, then the buyer can have the right to get out of the contract because of that. That's what this talks about. I don't see this happen very much, so that's why I'm just kind of summarizing this one. The other thing is if it's serviced by a private, so it's got a septic system or a well, then there are some things that you need to cover, and the seller and the buyer need to know about them. So if the property is served by well and or septic, seller agrees to furnish purchaser with certificate dated not more than 30 days prior to settlement from Virginia Department of General Services certified laboratory. Yes. Was that somebody saying something? Maybe not. Indicating that the well water is free from contamination by coliform bacteria and that there's no evidence of malfunction of the septic system. So you as a seller, if you're on well and septic, you are going to be responsible for ordering and paying for a water test of the well and a test of the drain field, the septic system. Also, if it's a VA loan, not only in the water test does it have to look for coliform bacteria, it also looks for lead, okay? So you need to know that if it's a VA loan, there's a little bit more expense for the seller on getting a lead water test. So inspection of septic system shall include, and you check all that are applicable, visual inspection of drain field surface with rod probing. So they're just walking over top and probing the system, or they're going to pump the contents in a visual inspection, or other. So there's other could be a dye test. So you just walk over, you put dye you flush dye down the toilet and wait a little bit and see if it bubbles to the top of the ground. That's not a good thing if it does. So inspection per manufacturer's guidelines of alternative septic systems. So the other thing, if it's determined that there are problems, so there is coliform bacteria or lead in the water, or the septic system is failing, then the seller is responsible for fixing that. But what it says here is that the max amount, it's going to go down to paragraph H, which there's a limitation on how much is agreed upon for repairs for F and G. So that's a well, a septic, and wood infestation. So the defaulted limitation in paragraph H is $1,000, but the parties can agree to something different. So they can agree to something higher or lower than the $1,000. But let's say they pick $1,000. The max that the seller has to pay to fix the septic and well is $1,000 combined, and combined with the wood infestation. But if they're not covering it all, then the buyer can get out of the contract, or the buyer can decide to make up the difference, or whatever the case might be. It also says in here, just to let you know, and it can be a little bit of a lender issue, is it says that the seller can just say, I'm not going to fix any of these, but I'll credit you that $1,000 for you, buyer, to fix it. Lots of times lenders don't like that. If there is a problem with the water or the septic, or there's wood infestation, the lender is going to want those to be fixed, not the buyer to get a credit on that. So before you try to accept a credit there, you better find out from your lender whether they're going to accept that. Anybody ever run into trouble with that one? Michael, have you seen that as a problem before or not?
What was the question again?
Oh, under the limitation paragraph, taking the $1,000 as a credit as opposed to fixing the termite problem or the septic problem or whatever, being a problem with the lender.
Not necessarily, because the lender is generally not privy to repair items or anything like that. It all, I guess it would depend on if it comes up on the inspection report.
Well, yeah. So if it's a bad termite inspection, the lender normally gets a copy of that. And if it's
Correct.
not fixed and they're just saying we're going to credit, $1,000 to fix it, lender normally wants the problem fixed. Correct?
Yeah, they're not going to let a property that has WDI or septic or anything like that.
Yeah. So I didn't think it was any different. I mean, that's how I've seen it in Northern Virginia a lot in everything. So didn't think it was any different down there.
I generally recommend increasing the limit on that, especially if you do have a septic system, because I mean, a WDI treatment alone could be easily over $1,000.
Yeah. And even just a cracked, if it has septic and it's got a cracked septic tank or even just the top to a septic tank, you can go through a lot of money in a hurry there too. So it's a good point.
So how are we able to determine what options to choose here for that septic inspection?
It should be in the listing itself. So when you're looking at the listing in the MLS, it should state whether it's septic or a municipal system or not, whether it's
Yeah, I
public or
understand
private.
that, but if it's septic and you're doing an inspection, septic system inspection of these applicable boxes here,
Oh.
how do we determine which ones to choose?
Your buyer really gets the option to choose on that one. So,
With the inspection
because
report
again,
not given
normally
out,
the lenders aren't worried about it so much as long as something is being done and it comes back good. The lender's not worried about it too much. The only thing is sometimes if the health department gets involved in it, they're going to be having you open up and pump the contents and do a visual inspection. They normally are not going to allow you to just do a walkthrough if the health department's going to get involved.
will the inspection say something about this and have a dollar amount or no?
It's a different inspector that would be looking at this. Yes, Michael.
Okay, it's a different, okay, I didn't understand that.
So regarding what you should check here, it all depends on the type of system you have. If it's the conventional, you're generally going to check the first and second selection. If it's an alternative system, you probably want to check all three of them.
Yeah,
Thank you.
first, second, and the last one. Yeah. It also, a lot of it, I hate to say, depends on the age and things like that. So that's what people look at. If it's an old system, myself, if I were a buyer, I would be choosing the top two boxes there because I want it to be opened up and someone to actually look and see if the system is, still in good order. Because if you've got to replace the whole drain field system, you can be looking at $5,000 to $10,000
Or more.
or more. Yeah, or more. Because lots of times when that first one fails, if you're on a small lot, all of a sudden now you're putting in on an alternative system. So now you could be talking a $20,000, $25,000 easily. So, but we won't spend the whole time period going over that here today. But it is something to look into. If you're selling more rural where it's going to be private well and or septic. VA and FHA loans, If a VA or FHA loan is selected in paragraph 4, it is expressly agreed that notwithstanding any other provisions of this agreement, purchasers shall not be obligated to complete the purchase of the property or incur any penalty by forfeiture of earnest money deposit or otherwise unless purchaser has been given in accordance with the HUD and FHA VA requirements a written statement by the Federal Housing Commissioner, Veterans Administrator, or a direct endorsement lender setting forth the appraised value of the property of not less than the purchase price. Purchaser shall have the privilege and option of proceeding if it doesn't. So let me boil this down. In this hot market we're having right now, there are some agents that are telling their buyers, even if it's FHA or VA, and especially VA, oh, well, you know what? If you want to waive the appraisal, you can do that. And then the listing agent is telling their sellers, oh, they have waived the appraisal, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. So therefore, if it doesn't appraise, you don't have to worry about it. They still have to buy it. That is a wrong answer. On FHA and VA, if it doesn't appraise, those buyers can still get out of that contract. Okie doke. So don't misinform your seller about that. On conventional, that may be a true statement, but not FHA and VA. So mechanics lien disclosure, I'm not going to worry about that. I'll be honest, and I don't remember the last time I saw a mechanics lien on a property that we had to deal with. Non-binding mediation, it's saying that if there's a dispute that they are supposed to, the buyer and seller are supposed to mediate first before going to court. Miscellaneous, this agreement represents the entire agreement. This goes into, it says that handwritten or typewritten things in the contract, if they are inconsistent with the pre-printed terms, then the handwritten or typewritten terms supersede what is pre-printed. It also goes into if there are, you can have one party sign on one document, another party sign on another document. As long as the two documents are the same, those counter signatures count as a document so that it is still ratified. The only place that that can't happen, just to let you know, is on lead disclosure. The lead disclosures, all parties must initial and sign on the same document. Other than that, you can have counter signatures and still be a ratified document. Seller representation, seller warrants each person signing has clear authority to do so. Electronic signatures, it is agreed that electronic signatures are allowed, and so therefore this thing can be ratified by electronic signatures. Acceptance, this agreement becomes a legally binding agreement upon ratification and delivery. Unless ratification and delivery of this agreement occurs by blank AM or PM on a particular date that you would fill in, this offer shall expire and shall not be binding on either party. If the parties desire to accept an offer that has expired, then the date set forth in this paragraph 27 must be revised to the ratification date or later. Each party must initial such revision, and ratification and delivery must occur prior to the revised expiration date. So if you put that this thing expires by this Friday and the seller doesn't accept it by Friday, and on Saturday they say, you know what, we want to accept that. Well, then this paragraph right here is going to need to be changed to at least Saturday or beyond, and the parties are going to need to initial this change before they can ratify the contract, okay? That's what that is saying. As used herein, ratification and delivery means delivery of a final accepted and signed agreement to the other party or their respective broker or salesperson by hand delivery, fax, or electronic transmission, or by a professional courier, so on and so forth, United States mail with return receipt requested. In the event of a dispute, the sender shall have the burden to demonstrate delivery of the to the recipient of the final accepted and signed agreement. Date of ratification means the date upon which ratification and delivery occurs. Purchaser and seller understand that they shall have the right to withdraw any offer at any time prior to ratification and delivery. If either party withdraws an offer, notice shall be deemed effective upon receipt. If any offer is withdrawn, all deposits shall be returned to purchaser at no penalty. So that last part there is pretty important. So if you have made an offer on a property, and let's say you made an offer on a property 2 weeks ago, you haven't heard anything back, haven't gotten a counter or anything. If your buyer still wants to let that sit out there because they still might want to buy that property, that is fine. However, if they're getting ready to write an offer on another property, you better withdraw that offer that they've got on that one before they make a new offer, because they make a new offer and that seller accepts, and then all of a sudden that offer that's been out there for 2 weeks, the other seller accepts. Now you've got two primary contracts that your buyer is responsible for. Okay, so before a buyer is making a new or an offer on another property, withdraw their previous offers or counter offers or whatever they are. Everybody understand that? Because you do not, I was just talking, unfortunately, with our E&O provider, the claims director, the one that pretty much covers all of our offices is called Liz Ives. I was asking her, unfortunately, I was on because we've got a claim, but I was asking her, what is she seeing right now? Because she's seeing a lot of things. One of the ones that she's seeing a lot of is sellers accepting multiple primary contracts and buyers getting into multiple contracts, multiple primary contracts. So you don't want to do that. That's not a good place to be. Any questions?
Rick,
Yes.
this is Sandy Crawford. This is also for backup offers as well, correct?
Yes,
Rescinding
yes.
those?
So the good news about a backup offer, if you use the language, you know, the standard forms, and you are a ratified backup contract, one of the things about that being in the backup position is that the buyer can withdraw from being in the backup position anytime prior to becoming the primary contract. Okay, so that's a good place, you know. Yeah, they would probably rather be the primary, but if another offer, I mean, if another property comes on and they want to make an offer on it, good point, Sandy, they would, prior to becoming the primary contract, you know, they can withdraw from that backup position. And probably should withdraw from that backup position. Anything else? Well, I want to thank you all. I think it's in about I believe it's maybe, I think it's October or August the 4th or something like that. I'm going to be going over addenda and everything that go with the contract. So let me look at that real quick here. Yep. Same time, same day. It's a Wednesday, August the 4th. I'll be covering the rest of the addenda and everything that go with the contract. So if we don't have any more questions for today, I'm going to try and give my voice a little bit of a break, and you all stay cool. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Rick.
Have a great one. Bye.
still gotta like go on by yourself, like, you gotta read over again.
You still got it.
You were in your phone.
I look down, I look up.
Question at the very beginning. You may get this. Selling broker and listing broker, we put the name of the place, not his name. We don't put his name.
Not his name. Or no, Keller.
Keller Williams Richmond West. Okay. What? No, no.
Oh.
Thank you.
I've been following along in I've got a hit to where to send the recording. Thank you, though. I appreciate you trying to take care of it.
Yeah, I see you rush over there the first time. I know
Oh.
everybody show it.
You know, I know, it's crazy.